Alright guys, I wanted to shoot a little video here of Macbook Air. This is model number A2337. Broken screen. Let me show you how to replace this screen without replacing the whole clamshell. Alright, this is the way I do it. I do quite a few of these. So, but just want to show you how I do it. There are other ways to do this, and I'm just going to show you with the equipment and what I use. I'm going to use a Pentalobe 4 to take the bottom case off. I do use an electric screwdriver for this. Makes it a little bit easier, a little bit faster. I do recommend you have a mat or something with some places you can put the parts, some of the screw parts, some of the little brackets that we're going to be taking off. Make sure you keep them in an order that works for you. So now we can take the bottom case off. I also use a magnet and just stick all the little screws to that. All right. Next, we're going to use, I think this is a T5 or P5. It's been a while since I bought this. I'm going to take out the brackets and screws here that hold the Wi-Fi on, the Wi-Fi cables. And I just put those in a little screw tray here. You'll have 4 here that you have to remove. Sorry if my hand's getting in the way of some of this stuff. Alright, so we're going to take those 4 screws out. And then we're going to take the 2 black screws that are right here. 2 black screws that hold this part of the display in. Alright, and now we're going to take the small screws here. This is a T3 that I use along with the magnet again, but I don't use the magnet really on this. I just keep the magnet so it holds the screws on the end of the screwdriver. And we're going to take these screws out for these little brackets here that hold the little brackets on. And I put those in my little screw holder in order the way I take them out. Just speeds things up. Like I said, I'm sorry if my arm is in the way. All these little screws are the same size, but I keep them all separate in my little organizer over here. The magnet's good for picking up the little brackets and being able to hold them so you don't drop them. Next, we take the Wi-Fi screw out, this little bracket that holds the Wi-Fi cables on. Alright, so now I have those out of the way. What I like to do is disconnect everything. So I take a pair of tweezers, pop that up. Oh, first thing I forgot to do, disconnect the battery. Alright, pop all the little brackets up, pop the Wi-Fi off, because you're going to remove this whole piece here. Then I'll take the screws out that hold on the whole clamshell of the display. So now you have everything disconnected that you have to unbolt or unscrew. So now I take my tweezers with the back end and I pry in here to just get this whole bracket here to release because it is kind of taped in, and it just makes things a little easier. Just be careful what you're prying on to make sure you're not damaging anything. I just use the edge of the board as a little area to pry on. So, now this little piece comes off. Just set it aside. And now we're ready to take the clamshell off. Alright, so just take the clamshell, fold it all the way over, wiggle it around very carefully because we don't want to break this little cover here that says Macbook Air on it, because this is like made out of a little type of tempered glass and is easy to break. Take my tweezers again and I will pull the gasket out. Now, like I said, this is how I do it. There may be other ways to do it, but this is how I found is the easiest. And be very careful with this gasket. You don't want to break it, but it will probably stretch it some. And I just gently go around, try not to stretch it, and pull the whole gasket out. Set that aside because we are going to reuse that. Alright, so now we got the gasket out. And what I generally do is put it over on a heat plate. We have a heat plate right here. I'll put the screen on it. I hold the clamshell on it. Let me put the camera down here. I put the whole clamshell on it and just take the cables, try to pull them back out of the way, because we want to get the heat on that little glass display piece. That's what we're going to remove first. I have my heat set to about 99 degrees, so we're going to leave it on there and let it heat up for a few minutes. You don't want to leave it on there too long where you warp the inside layers of the screen, and I'll show you those in a couple minutes. Okay, so it's been on the hot plate here for 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to take it off, and we're going to remove this little piece here and try not to break it. What I like to use is this little, I don't remember what it's called. It's like a magic glass tool, but it's not magic glass. This one's pretty thin. I think it's about 5 millimeters, or I'm sorry, 0.05 millimeters. And what I do is I'll just pry up on the edge a little bit so I can just fit this piece underneath of it. And then I'm going to slide very carefully down and just get underneath of this piece very gently to hopefully not break it. And this one I noticed was cracked right at the edge, so it did break. There was a little crack here where the screen apparently has been broken, because I can see a crack in the screen as well. But we're going to try to get it off, see if we can save it, because I am currently out of these. I'm waiting for an order to come in. But I doubt we're going to be able to reuse that one. We may have to try to find it off a different machine. Alright, so now that we get that out of the way, we have a multitude of screws here that we have to take out. Now these screws on the end are different than these screws on the center. So I take those two screws out first using my T3, and I kind of keep them separate from the rest of them. It doesn't really matter, but I think it helps when you're putting that all back together for that beauty ring or beauty piece there to go in flat. That little cover. And that's very important when you're going to try to close the lid on your machine, that it goes down flat. These screens are very fragile and break really easy. Alright, so now that we get that out of the way, we're going to remove this little cover. Get that cover out of the way. So now we're ready to take out the screen. But what I usually do, put it back on the hot plate for a little bit longer. Alright, while that piece is heating up, the back panel, I want to show you something here. This is a screen with everything already taken off, and so some of the things you have to be careful with is right here is where your camera sits. This camera's been removed, but you have some cables that run to your camera and different things, so you have to be careful in this middle section here when you're taking the screen out to not damage those cables. Also, you have all these layers of plastic screen in here for your resolution and filtering and all that. So you want to be very careful when you're cutting this edge off to not go in too deep. You don't want to get glue, and this tape that Apple uses is super sticky. And if it gets on these screens, you'll be able to see it once your new display is on. So you want to be very careful not to cut in too far. So here's your little cutout tool, and you can see how far roughly to go in to cut that out. And then of course on the top you can go in deeper because it's thicker there. They have two layers that when you're cutting the screen out, and I'll show you what I mean here in just a minute. So you just have to be very careful of that. And this is another reason why I removed the gasket, so you're not catching underneath the gasket or cutting the gasket as you're cutting the screen out. So I usually just feel the screen over here on the hot plate, see if it's getting warm, and if it is, you know, it's softening up that glue and makes it a little easier to get out. Alright, so I think it's warm enough. Now this screen is pretty cracked, pretty bad, so it might just shatter as it's coming out. I try to take it out as easy as I can. So you just have to find a place to start. I like to start on this side, pry it up. My tool's bent a little bit, so I'm just gonna put it under the edge. I kind of like it that way. And then just start working the edges very easily. I do an initial cut first, all the way around. Like I said, don't go in very deep or you'll get on that plastic. You can see here's where the screen is really broken, right here in this corner. So I'll go at it a different angle. Alright, so what I usually do then is I turn my tool, because you can see how it gets this black tape on. I turn it to a clean side and kind of go in just a little bit deeper and work my way back around. You can kind of feel it release. And then remember this middle section, be careful because that's where the camera is. Okay, and then I'll just move to another clean section on my cutoff tool and keep going around. And why I use the clean sections is because I don't want to get that goop from the tape on those parts of the display that's inside. Alright, and then we can grab this part of the screen here. Let's see if we got in far enough to get it all the way off. It's still kind of sticking, so just kind of work your way around as you're lifting the screen. Like I said, just keep working around, take your time, but you want to hurry because you want that to get it while that glue is soft. Alright. So there, we have the display off. So you can see we didn't get any glue on anything. We did a little bit of something on this display here. Not sure if it's glue or if it cracked that just a little bit, but it's the best you can do with what you got. So now what I like to do too, I'll set this aside for a second. We need this metal plate off of this old screen. So what I usually do is take this, put it back on the heat plate, let it warm that up. You can use a heat gun for this as well, but I have the metal plate and that's what I usually use. So now what I do is I clean this up, just get some alcohol and get this little glue off before it really sets on there. Alright. Alright. You want to keep your work area pretty clean because you don't want to get any fibers or anything on the new screen. Alright. So next I will go through and clean this the rest of the way. How I do it is with this little wedge scraper here. This one's a little wide. I'd like to get a little narrower one, but this is what I have right now. And I'll just go around and very carefully clean all this rubbery tape off. You want to be careful not to hit the screen with your razor because it will scratch it or damage it. So then I'll just take some tweezers and pull this stuff out of the groove where the gasket will go. And you want to be careful here, you have a couple little tabs that hold all the plastic screen down to the clamshell. And you don't want to cut those. You want everything to sit in as flat as possible when you're done. And if you don't have to take it out, it's easier of getting everything back together. So once you get around those little tabs there, you can usually just run down, push a little force, get your razor in the right spot, and you can usually just run down it. Just be careful not to get it over on your plastic stuff. Sometimes if I get a little ball of it like this, I'll just pull it off. And we're going to get all this as clean as we can. I would not recommend using any alcohol or anything on cleaning this, because you get anything underneath these layers and it'll show us like watermarks when you put the whole screen together. So I don't use any kind of cleaner or anything on this. If something gets on the screen, I try to get it off the best I can, but you don't want to use any liquid. It seems like if you get just a little bit of liquid on this, it like just spreads out and goes everywhere. Believe me, I've tried. And then once you get everything back together, it will show through it, and you just ruined a screen and a whole clamshell. So this is very tedious and time consuming. You're going to be very careful around the camera. And the cables here, you don't want to cut any of those cables. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this off, and I'll probably put this in a hyperlink or something, a hyperspeed. Alright, so unfortunately I had a little issue with my GoPro. Froze up, but what I did was just cleaned off as much of this little rubbery stuff here as I could get off. Try to make it as smooth as possible. Just going around with the scraper like this. And then I put the gasket back in. Now the gasket has these little notches. Let me see if I have one I can show you. That's out because I already put this one back in. But it has little notches. I'm not sure if you can see it here into my finger. But these little notches go into little notches. I'll show you on this bad one. Has little notches in the display. I'll take this gasket back out. Little notches that go back in the display settings. So if you line those up, you can press them back in. And I just use this little tool that looks like a little pizza cutter and run around the display, just making sure it pushes it back in the groove. On the corners you may have to take a tweezer or the back of tweezers, something that's rounded, and just push that back into the edge. Now there is tape back there still because we didn't pull that tape out, and you can just kind of run it in and it will kind of hold it back into that gasket. So then what I do here on the ends is I pull this little lever out, make sure they're up out of the way, because we're going to need that to line the screen back up. and get the screen back in there evenly. Now, okay, so now that we have all those tabs pushed back in, have the gasket pushed back in, we're going to set this aside for a minute, and we're going to work on getting that metal plate out. So we need this metal plate here. It goes back, it's going to go back on the new display. So usually what I do, we don't need any of this. So I just take any kind of cut-off tool, get rid of that. Try to do the bottom part a little gentle because you don't want to deal with all the glass. Like you can see, the glass is breaking off with it. So we have that separated. Recycle this glass. Alright, so now we're going to remove all the glue backing, tape backing off of this metal piece, get it nice and clean. And we need to do the same to this, but we're not reusing this one because it's broken. So I'm going to have to find one of those, but you need to remove the tape off the back of this. I'll show you that as well. Usually what I do is put it back up here on this heat plate, let that get warm while I'm taking this off. Alright, let's see, we're in frame here. Just take the metal razor scraper, just be careful, don't let it slip and get your fingers, and remove it like that. So I like to try to get it as clean as possible. All this residue off. I usually just take this off as well. The rubber or the tape off here at the bottom. Okay, now that you have that nice and clean, we're going to reuse this in a minute. Alright, so for this little tempered glass piece here, do the same thing, removing very carefully because you don't want to break this, even though this one's already broken, and it's real easy to jab down in this too far, and you'll take part of the coating off, and then you'll see it once you put it on the display that it's chewed up through that. So that's how I take this off, but like I said, this one's junk, so I would just go down the whole thing. You can get it to a certain point and start peeling the tape, but I just will slide my razor blade or knife up just to keep pressure on it so it doesn't crack. This piece is very fragile. I have found these where you can get replacement ones, but they usually don't have the name on it. But I'm currently out of them, waiting for another order to come in. Don't ask me where I order my stuff from because I won't tell you, but you can just look it up online. You will find it if you look. Sorry, I can't say where we get it from. So that's how you remove this tape. Like I said, this one's broken. And you gotta be careful right in the middle where this one just came apart. There is a little spot there where it looks like when it was molded, it will break very easily right there. So just be careful. That one's trash. I'll have to find another one. But let's move on to the next step. I'll show you another way to remove this, just using a heat gun. This is on a parts. This one had liquid damage in the back of the display, so the display is not good. And I'm going to try to save this gasket because we may need it at some point in time. We have one that rips up really bad. If I can get it out of here without ripping. It's a little more difficult when it's still in the machine like this, but it can be done. There we go, just get it out of the way a little bit. Just work it very gently under the edge. There we go, it's out. Alright. This thing is very fragile, so like I said, just be very careful you don't break it. Come on, let go. There we go. And it's out. So we're going to put this over here. Let that heat up, and we'll get the glue off of it in just a minute. Alright, so we have the new display here. As you can see, this new display is very fragile. So what you want to do is flip it over first. We're going to take this protective screen off. There's a protective cover over the back side. And take this little piece of plastic off here that has a little adhesive back that helps stick to this. I take this 3M tape. I believe this is 2mm tape or either 5mm tape. I can't remember. I think it's 5 actually. So we're going to take the 5mm tape. We put a little layer across here. You don't want to cover up these little bullseyes that are on here. I'll show you these bullseyes. Hopefully the camera will zoom in on them. Right here, in my finger, there's a little square. Don't know if the camera's picking that up, but there's a little square with an X on it, or a cross on it. And you have to line those holes up. This little hole here at the end has to line up with these little bullseye marks. So I'm going to pull this tape off very carefully. Make sure it's stuck on there. So don't put the tape over those bullseye holes. It makes it a little more difficult to see. I'll take a flashlight and line it up with a flashlight. You can see through then and see the little bullseye holes. Hold one end over, kind of get it on the tape just a little bit so it holds in spot. Then you can move over to the other side same thing. Alright, so now that you have that in place, we'll remove this backing. And now we're going to put this aside. And get the display side again. Now this is the way I do it. I use this B7000 glue, and I glue the screen back in. I don't use the tape that Apple uses. I've had good luck with this, and it dries fast, and this is what I use. So make sure you have your gasket in place, then just run a nice little thin, very thin layer of this glue, and I do it the side closest to the gasket, so if it get extra it doesn't smush out into this display. Just a very thin layer. Then up at the top I kind of zigzag back and forth across the wider top spot until I get over to the camera. Then I just run a layer above the camera and then zigzag again at the other side. Hope you can see this. I hope my arm's not in the way. I'll show you when I'm done what it looks like. Then make sure you pull it away so any stringy glue stuff doesn't get back on your display. So that's kind of what it looks like. Hopefully you can see it there all right. Just a little thin layer around and zigzaggy at the top. Alright, so now what I do is take a quick look in the light and make sure nothing has gotten on this display. Do not touch this with your fingers without gloves on or you'll leave fingerprints. Alright, so now the fun part. We have to get this black piece here sits in the little groove right here. And that's not always the easiest to do, so take your time. I flip the screen over. I usually turn this to the side, one side or the other, whichever works for you. Make sure you pull this piece of the display up and feed the two backlight displays through that. Show you over here. So feed it through here, and then I get that back piece. Kind of look at your screw holes down here on the lower section where you have that metal piece. Kind of get those screws lined up. Kind of look back. See if you have that little piece to line up to drop down into that groove. If it doesn't go into that groove, you won't be able to close your screen all the way on your computer once you get everything back together. So you want to line up, and then you can just kind of push gently and feel if it goes down in that groove. Be very careful. These screens are very fragile. You can take a little screw, tweezers or something, and kind of fit down in there. I like to use the glue because you can kind of slide the screen back and forth just a little bit to get it to line up with the screw holes and to get that piece down in that display. or in that little groove of the display, the back of the display. So now that you've got that lined up, like I said, you can kind of slide the screen back and forth in this gasket. Just do it very, very carefully. Now I'll get my screwdriver and I'll get the first two screws that go in each corner. Line those up, put those in, and that will hold that silver piece down into where it goes. I used to use tape to hold the display in, but this final step was very difficult of getting the screen to line up in here, because it's like once you get it taped down, it's taped, it's not coming back out or it'll crack. So that's why I started using the glue. I like the glue better, a little stinkier, but it does the job. So now I usually put one screw in right here, and then there's a couple little tape areas that you have to pull off. Get that one off. And there's a couple here that you just have to pull back a little bit. Get the tape off the little sections that go on the screen. Don't know how necessary this is to do, but I usually do it. Make sure you fold these out, because when you pull this little blue tape off, if you don't fold it back, it will rip these and break them off. But I think this just holds the screen a little bit better to that little metal bracket that goes through there, since you don't really have any glue or tape holding this section of the screen down. Alright, so we got that done. Now we have this little bracket. This bracket sits in here. It's more of just a little decorative bracket that covers the cable, so you can't see the cable once you open the clamshell and are using it. And so now we can put all these other little black screws in, and we'll probably speed this up. Okay, so now that we have the display in, we'll take some, fold these tabs back again, or at least pull them up out of the way. Then we take some of our tape and run a layer of tape down across the bottom here. I usually try to get it down out of this groove from the little decorative bezel that goes in there, if you can. And cut it off as even edge as you can. Press it down a little bit. Too much there. And then what we're going to do is pull the edge of it up, get the backing off. Then we're going to take these rubber tabs and fold them down into where they go. And then here's the new face plate that I cleaned off. We're going to line that up. Line this up. And hopefully get in here in the right spot. Sometimes you just have to manipulate this rubber gasket a little bit to get all the parts underneath and in the right spot. Alright, so I think we pretty much got it there. We got a little spot where this is hanging up. You can see it coming out a little bit. Sometimes you have to take a little piece of tape. Cut a little piece of tape and slide it in there just to hold the ends down. So I just take a piece of my tweezers, try to work that edge up a little bit. And just slide it into there. And be patient. And get it to press down. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and then we'll get ready to put this back into the computer. Alright, so now the next part, we're going to put the display back into the computer itself. What I do is I push these hinges all the way up out of the way, and very carefully line everything back up. Hopefully this is getting it in the screwed okay. And just work the display back in very carefully. And then bend it down and start putting screws in. I start with the larger screws. Alright, now we're going to put the rest of this back. We put the 6 screws in to hold the clamshell on. So now we're going to put the wireless antenna back on. So we feed it through this little hole here. Then you have to flip up the tab for the display and just kind of put it back into place there. And now we can put the screws in that hold the antenna into place. Be the 4 longer screws. And if you use an electric screwdriver, you don't have to crank down on it. Just do it till you feel the screw seat. Now these are the 2 black ones that hold this board down. So now we have to plug in all the plugs. Got the antenna, And I like to do that with a pair of tweezers. If I find where my tweezers are, here they are. So, I usually do the antenna first. It's just the way I do it. Kind of line those up. And push them down with my finger. The backlight, you can usually just kind of feel it with your fingers and when to push down. Display is usually pretty easy to get in. The backlight ones are the ones that are a little more tricky. Alright, you got all those in. Now we can start putting on the brackets. Start with Wi-Fi bracket. So get those in. Got all the screws snugged up. Now we have to plug the battery in. Don't forget to do that. Flip the little lever over. Now we can put the rear case on. Put it through. The screw with the longest thread goes in the middle. The long screw with the short thread goes in the corners. And then the small screws go around the edge. Alright, now we're done. So now we have the display done. We're going to plug it into the power because this one is completely dead, and we'll make sure the screen works properly. Alright, so here's the screen. It's working. I left everything covered up because I don't want the information of the user out there. So good to go. We can pull this screen off now, the protective cover, and we're all good. Thanks for watching this video. I know it's not my normal type of video, but hopefully it helps you out. And if you have to do a MacBook Air with the Retina screen that is broken, how you can replace just the screen instead of the whole clamshell, save you several $100s. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe.